Hello. Those who have not taken a class with me yet, I'm Seana Holmes. I've been sewing for almost 20 years and drafting for 10. And tonight we're going to talk about drafting a fitted bodice like the one that I'm wearing. To give you an idea of how well these things hold, I'm an I cup. And I'm not wearing a bra underneath this. They stay in place. It is a magnificent fit. It's very comfortable. I don't have straps falling off of my shoulders. I cannot recommend these fitted bodices anymore. I mean, they're fantastic. So we're going to talk about how to draft one of these. And the first thing we need are measurements. Where is share screen? Christy, if you could make me a co-host, it's not letting me share screen. Thank you very much. So I'm going to pull up this screen right here is from the measurement sheet that I use on my website for my clients. So these, the upper body are the measurements you're going to need for the bodice. If you want to do anything else, you'll also need the others. The arm's eye is not a measurement we're going to put into the pattern itself. It's to make sure that the hole you're going to be making on the bodice is big enough. So you need chest, underbust, waist, hips, waist, natural waist to underbust, center shoulder to bust point, which is your nipples, bust point to bust point, front width. So you put your arm down and you're going from right here, just in front of where the arm connects to the armpit, and you're going across the top, not directly over the fullest part of the breast, but above the fullest part of the breast. And that's going to determine how far apart this part, the balance points of the arm's eye are. Back width is the same thing on the back. You need your shoulder width, and your shoulder seam is from the base of your neck to where your arm connects to your shoulder. And then center back neck to waist. I recommend getting the neck base as well, just so you can make sure your opening is going to be big enough. And then head, we don't really need to worry about it that much with this particular pattern. So those are the measurements you're going to need. The program that I use is called Seamly 2D. It's two programs, Seamly Me, which is where you put in the measurements, and Seamly 2D, which is where you make the patterns. If you were in my How to Pattern class, you would have seen the program. Let me do the share. All right, so I've already got the construction lines for the around the outside put up. This top and bottom line are the widest circumference divided by 2 plus ½ inch. And the reason you do that is so that you add the ½ inch so that there's a little bit of ease and it's not sucking you in and you can't breathe. Because while you want this really fitted, you don't want it too fitted, because then you get muffin top. The height is the center back neck to waist. And then I've divided the top in half and the bottom in half, connected those two lines. And then the sides, I divided in half and then in half again for the construction lines. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the front, because the front is the most complex piece. Once you get the front done, the back is a breeze. The first thing I usually do is I drop an inch down from this point, because this is your armpit point. And if you leave the bottom of the arm's eye right here at this point, it's going to dig into your armpit, and that's not comfortable. So I usually drop it down about an inch. You can go a little more if you're more comfortable with that, but an inch is usually enough. You don't want to have too much space open with these bodices. Otherwise, you're going to get weird gapping. Your chest isn't going to sit right. So just make sure you leave it fairly close. Okay. Next, we're going to do the shoulder and neck region. Distance along line. So you're going to go from your center front. This side right here is your center front. This is your side seam. And over here is your center back. So you're going to go from your center front to your side seam to the function, and you're going to look for shoulder width. They have a handy little search function. Double click it, and you're going to go divide by 2 because you only need half of the shoulder width. You're only working with half of the front. Now you're going to go from that shoulder point back to the center front, and you're going to go the shoulder seam. Okay, so this is the neck opening, and this is your shoulder seam. We're going to adjust that down a bit here in a second because your shoulders slope. They don't, on most people, they don't go straight out. Some people, they do. All right, so we're going to go down from A14, and we're going to go with line lengths. And the reason you want to do this instead of using a measurement or just putting in a number is when you put in new measurements, that distance between A1 and A14 is going to change with different people. So you don't want to have to go through and change each point on this neck hole every time you put in new measurements. So by going with line lengths, it'll change it to automatically match the length of this line. And you want to make just a little box. This is to give you an idea of where the neck is. Obviously, the neck is not square, it is curved, but this gives you a general idea of where your neck is. Okay, so once you've got your little neck box, we're going to go down one and 3/8 inches, which this is from, let me grab the book real quick. I'm getting the 1 3/8 inches from the Costume Technician's Handbook. I don't know how they figured out that that's how far down you need to go for the shoulder, but it works, so I'm not going to question it. And we're going to connect them because we need that line for the next point. Always start closest to where the point of the arc is when you're doing this. It'll mess up otherwise. So you use your shoulder seam, and see, they're not that far. It's almost directly below, not quite, but close enough that it's not going to matter. So we connect these with the line, and there is your shoulder. I like to move points in about an inch from the edges. Otherwise, the outside edge falls off your shoulder and the inside edge rubs against your neck. If you're looking for a certain width of band, you can also move it in that much. Like say I wanted this to be 2 inches, I would find the center point and then measure out 1 inch on each side. We're going to find the center point now, because we're going to need that later. So the next step is to find the balance points on the arm. And for that, you need your front width. We're going to divide that by 2, since we're only working with half of the front. Now, if I had kept my outside point right here where the shoulder is, this would be fine. But because I moved it in, I want this to move in. And so we know we're going from the center to the side. So I need to move it closer to the center. So we're going to subtract, starting with 1 inch. And that looks a lot better. So now we're going to connect them with a line. And then curves go a certain way. And when you're transferring this to the layout, when you select points, you have to go in a clockwise manner. So you're going to start at like A21, go along the neckline to the next point, down to the next point, over to the next point. So what you need to do, curves will start at the point that you click first and go towards, see there's an arrow. So this is going the right way. Just adjust that. So you got to make sure your curves are going the right way. Otherwise, the program won't recognize them when you go to transfer it. So that looks pretty good. I might go a little deeper here. You want this to be a little deep because you got to be able to move your arms forward. If they're too shallow, it's going to restrict your arm movement. So the next step is to find your bust point. So we're going to come down here to the armpit line. And we're going to do bust point to bust point, divided by 2. And this is a little far over from where I want it. Most likely this person has a wide set chest, wider than their shoulders. So we're going to move the point to where we want the chest to sit when it's in the bodice. So we're going to go over 1.5 inches, I think. Let's go 2. There we go. That 1/2 inch makes a big difference, believe it or not. So that's where we want the nipple to be sitting when we're done. And then we're going to do the same distance on the bottom line. I don't want wrong tool. So I'm going A8 to A24. And the reason we're using the line length instead of the measurement is because we subtracted something from it. So if we have to change what we subtracted from it in a new pattern, we'd have to change the bottom one manually. By using the line length, it'll change with that line length. So I'll show you what I mean. Watch what the A25 point does. It moves with it. So that saves a little bit of time, makes it nice and handy. Then we're going to connect these 2 points, and we're going to go and we're going to do the intersection points of line and arc. We're going to select our line, again, starting with the point closest to the arc. And the arc is going to be centered on the center of the shoulder point. And this is where you use center shoulder to bust point. And that's sitting a little lower than I want. Again, we want to adjust it to where we want the chest to sit. The only thing we can't really change too much is the waist to under bust point, but we can play around with the bust points. I want it closer to the top. Track 1, see what that looks like. Yeah, that's a little much. There we go. Okay. So now that we got that, we know where the fullest part of the bust is. This is going to be where the fullest part of the chest is. So we're going to go and find the waistline now. Friends, divide it by 4 because we're only working with a quarter of the body right now. And we're going to add a 1/4 inch so that we get an inch of ease all the way around. That way it's not squishing your belly and giving you a muffin bottom. And then we're going to connect these. So our next job is to find the underbust point. So we're going to go up from here. Waist to underbust. That's a little close for my liking, so I'm actually going to move this down. By just an inch. Half an inch. That's better. And then move this up. Because I have room for the under portion of the chest. Don't want to go a full inch. There we go. That little 1/4 inch, I think, will give us what we want. So now we need to find the width. And the best way to do that, 825 to 828. Is we're going to make a line going at the underbust point that goes all the way across. Long function. What does that look? Oh, it is the same. It's just the angle I'm looking at it at. Okay. So now we're going to connect the dots. And we want to get a point right here. We're going to connect those and those. And what we're going to do is take a point from that point towards the center front, because you want that side seam to be straight, because otherwise it's going to lay funky and look funky and your chest will be funky. Now I've been adding ease to all of the points. We're not adding ease here because this has got to be tight on the under bust. Otherwise your chest is going to slip down. Any wiggle room and your chest is going to slip down. This is especially important if you are a bigger busted woman, say like a D cup or bigger. A through C cup, you don't really have to do this point. Just have a little bit of a gap in the center front and it'll hold you fine. But bigger busted women, they need the support under the chest. Otherwise, it's just going to slip because gravity is not your friend. So that is my underbust point. Now we're going to go here. A25 to A26. Let's try the line lengths. That might help. And we're going to do the same thing at the chest. So that we keep room for the chest, but we keep that side seam straight. There we go. Okay. All right. Go from here to here. And if it's close enough to where that A34 point is, we're not going to worry about it. But if it's way out there, and again, I'm going to add a 1/4 inch of ease so that they're not too squished up. That's close enough that in all honesty, we don't need that point. We're just going to use this point because it's close enough that it's covered by the 1/4 inch, so we're not going to worry about it. And the next thing we do, we've already found the waist. So we're going to connect this to the waist with a line. And now we're going to do a little bit of a curving. First, we need to figure out where the top of the neckline is going to be. I would not recommend doing it here at the armpit point. That's going to be just a little too low unless you really want to show off the girls. I usually do midway between the balance point and the armpit point. And you don't want, if you leave this to this going straight up, you're going to have a weird thing hanging out. So you need to go in a bit. Usually an inch does it. So basically what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be connecting this point and this point and this point. Oh, that can actually go lower. Yeah, that looks good. So we're going to connect this point to this point to this point with a curved path instead of a curved line. So it's this one right here. Oh, that's spline. Point along spline. Point along curve. Spline is control points. Curve is control points. Oh, maybe it is spline. Okay. So this one, you want to start at the top, go down. And then when you're done connecting the points you want to connect, you hit enter. So now we're going to move that so it's not in the way. There we go. And we've got a nice little curved area there that'll hold the chest in. When you sew it together, it's going to look like it's going to monoboob, and it doesn't look right. But that's what I've done with this one, and it holds magnificently. And it used to be, I just did it straight, a straight front with a little bit of gapping, but I'd get weird gapping here because there was nowhere for my chest to go. So by having this bump in the front, it gives the chest somewhere to go instead of back here where it flares the armpits out.
Hey, Seana, can you unshare your screen so we can see what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And we will pin me. I'll let for everyone. Okay, so you can see how it kind of curves and then goes out. By having this curve here, it gives my chest somewhere to go. If there's nowhere for the chest to go, it's going to make the armpits flare out and do funky stuff, and it doesn't look right. Well, by having this, the chest has somewhere to go. It's not pushing the arm's eyes out. So you get a nice smooth line on the arm's eye. And yes, this process does work if you're drafting by hand. I'm using the exact same procedure. I'm just using a computer program to cut down on time. So let's share screen again. And from here, you can make your neckline. I'm working on one right now that they wanted a V-neck. You can do a V-neck, you can do a square. So I usually do a square neck. The other thing is, if you do straight across with this technique, with the curved front, it's going to peak up in the center. So you need to kind of slant the sides up a bit to keep it from peaking up in the center, which is perfectly period, actually, to have it peak in the center. Let's go over. I usually go over 3 or 4 inches and see what it looks like. Yeah, that gives a good window for the chest. So we're going to go connect those with a line. And we're going to come up about an inch to get the slant so you don't have the peaking in the front if you don't want it. And once you've printed off the pattern and sent it and gotten it cut out and you've done a mock-up, you can play around with it And like this was supposed to be a straight bottom, but it's slightly pointed. If I wanted to on the pattern, I could straighten that out on the pattern. But I kind of like the pointed front, so I'm going to leave it. And that is the front of your pattern piece. The hardest part. Now for the back. This is so easy. So you're going to come over. You don't have to do the shoulder seam and then subtract the shoulder width and then subtract the shoulder seam. You already know what you're doing. So you're going to go from line length. You want the A1 to A14, this one right in here. But you're going to subtract 1/2 inch. And the reason you do that is you want the back to be a little narrower, so it helps pull the straps up onto your shoulders and keeps them from slipping off of your body. And then you're going to go up 1 inch because the back of your neck is going to sit higher than the front of your neck. Okay, now you need to find the shoulder point. And connect them with a line. And you want this to be the same length as your front, otherwise it gives you a headache. So again, whatever width you made the front of the strap, you need to make the back of the strap, which seems like it's obvious, but I've made the mistake of not making them the same width. Okay, and the back neckline. I usually go down 1 inch at the center. You can go a little further if you want it to sit lower in the back. This one sits about 1 inch below, maybe 2 inches. And again, I usually do a square neckline. So we're just gonna do 5, we'll say. And then we're going to do 5. And then we're going to connect it up. And the reason I'm doing that is so that this angle right here is 90 degrees because the fabric, it's going to lay better on your body if this is a 90-degree angle. So there is your back neckline. Now to get the back arm. Okay. This is where your back width comes in. I'm going to divide it by 2. Now again, if I hadn't moved the shoulder point in, this would be fine. But I moved the shoulder point in, so I need to move this in about the same distance. And then we connect with a curve to here. And you want to go down about the same angle as this line. And you'll notice the back is shallower than the front because you don't need as much movement area in the back. That looks good. a lot of this is eyeballing. Once you're familiar enough with patterns, mostly from working with commercial patterns, you'll get familiar with pattern shapes and what they should look like. And that helps a lot in drafting. So now we're going to go A2 to A27. That way, if anything changes on the A2 to A27, this back waistline will change the same amount, as we want those to be the same. And there you have the pattern for a basic fitted bodice. In period, this is your sports bra. This is your underwear. You would wear an overgown to go over it. Ren fairs, no one's going to care. Most people won't even know. So the next thing you have to do is translate it to a layout so that you can print it off. So you're going to come down here to add details. And you're going to use, it's got a pattern piece with a plus. You're going to click on that. And you click on your first point and you just go around clockwise. When you get to a curve, you have to click on the curve, not the points on the curve. You can click on the points on the curve if you're going to put pass marks there. But you need to click on the curve itself in order to get it to read over. And then once you hit the last point, you hit enter. And this will pop up. I usually click forbid flipping because otherwise on the layout, it might flip the piece so it's facing the other way. And you don't always want that. Hit OK. Here we have, you can see what the piece is going to look like. So you can make any small adjustments that you need to make. Like there's a little bit of a point here that I don't want there. So we're going to go back to the draft. We're going to play with this a little bit. Back to the piece. That looks better. So if you right click on the piece, options comes up. For some reason, it will not let you add seam allowance when you first make the piece. You have to come into the piece view, seam allowance, and it'll automatically put in 0.25. I like to go at least half an inch. And that'll show up. If you don't want it to look like that, hide main path. And then to get the grain line, click the box. This is if you, like if you need something to go on the bias, you would put like 45-degree angle. This one, we want it to be on the straight of grain. This is going to deter the length, tells how many inches the grain line is going to be. So you just take it and you place it wherever you want it. I usually put it in the center. You cannot add labels unless they change that. I don't think they did. Detail. Bodice front. Let's see what it does. This has been updated since I started using it, so this is I haven't had time to play around with it. Yeah, that's what I thought. So what I generally do is I'll save it as a PDF and then open it up with Acrobat and just do some editing to like label the piece so I know whose it is and all that fun stuff. Go back to draft and get the back. And the reason I am selecting all of the points is because when I print this off, the only seam allowance I want is at the shoulder, the side seam, and the center front. I'm sorry, I've got a train coming. And the reason for that is, as you can see, I've bound off the edges of this bodice. There's no seam allowance here. This is the edge of the fabric that I cut. So the only place that I need seam allowance is where I'm going to be sewing the pieces together. And that's at the shoulder, the center front, and the side seams. If you're doing a center back closure, you're going to want seam allowance at the center back. Otherwise, it just goes on the fold. Seam allowance. And the way you do that on here is in the nodes section. Do we have time? Yeah, we got time. So at node 45, before it, we're going to do current seam allowance. After it, we're going to press 0. And see how it angles up like that? That's because I've got seam allowance at A48, but not at A45. So you just go around. So at node A48, we don't want any seam allowance on either side of it, so we change that to 0. Node A43, I don't want any seam allowance before it, but I do want after it. And at node A44, I do want before, I don't want after it. And at A49, I do not want on either side of it. A12, I do not want before, I do want after. So that is the edge of the fabric. There's no seam allowance there. Let's go. 50, I do want before, I do not want after. And then A3, I do not want before, I do want after. So I've got seam allowance here, here, and here, because we're going to say it's a back lacing bodice. So you would do the same thing on the front. You're always going to need that seam allowance on a curved front bodice, which is why I didn't bother with that middle point on that curve, because we're going to need that seam allowance, no matter if it's front lacing, side lacing, or back lacing. So once that's done, you come here to layout, and this pops up with a width. And most print shops can do up to 36 inches wide. And I just put a random number because one of the things you can hear is auto crop unused length. And then you can adjust the width as needed. Like I could probably take that down to 26. And then you select export layout. Oh, it's got a new folder. Here, file format, I usually do PDF files. You can also do a tiled PDF file, so you can print it off at home if you want to. Just make sure you change the template to your paper size, otherwise stuff's going to be funky. But I usually do PDF file Okay. And then mail it off to Office Depot for printing because it's only like $1.39. And then once you've got it cut out, you do the fitting. This is only boned. Let's stop share because I am done with that program. So this bodice contains 3 or 4 layers. I can't remember if I did 2 interlayers or not. But it is the lining, which is just a cotton muslin. And then I have the interlining, which is either 1 or 2 layers of cotton duck canvas. And the canvas stops right here. It does not go into the shoulders. It stops right here because you don't need it in the shoulders. You need it where it's going to hold you. And I don't think I put any, yeah, no, there's none in the back. So the only place I have cotton canvas is in the front because that's where my lacing is and that's where I need the strength. If you're going to be doing a back lacing, you're going to want to do front and back. So you've got the front because you need the strength to hold the chest, and back because you need the strength for the lacing. If you're going to do side, you got to do front and back because you need the strength for the lacing on both sides. But it does not have to extend up into the shoulders. It's fine to stop right here at the chest, at chest height. Trying to think what else. Bustier women, at least 2 layers of canvas, I would recommend. It'll hold you better. And when you do it, cut 1 on the cross grain and 1 on the straight grain. Something about the way that they stretch, they stop each other from stretching that way. Again, if you are not as busty, if you're A, B, or C cup, you can take the pattern in 1 inch on each side. So you've got a 2-inch gap here, and then just do the lacing, and the straight edge will be fine for you, because you just don't have as much to hold. It's, yes, boning. So this one has plastic zip ties. I'm not fond of it. The reason you want the boning is to keep, if you're going to use grommets, it keeps the grommets from tearing out the fabric. If I were to do a front lacing one again, I'd probably use spiral steel because it's just as flexible, but with the plastic, my body heat warps the plastic. Plus the spiral steel is lighter than the plastic for some reason. Who the funk? You definitely want boning on your lacing edges to help give strength and keep it in shape. Any other questions? My method of placing the grommet holes is I generally, so this one is spiral laced, as you can see. So it's tied on 1 hole, and then it goes over, the bottom holes are straight. This hole's only 1/2 inch above this hole. The rest of them are 1 inch, except for at the top, where this one's 1/2 inch. So for spiral lacing, that's how you would do it. Generally, there's 1 inch. For ladder lacing or cross lacing, they're the same lacing. You need to measure the distance that you're doing and try to find something that splits evenly. Ladder lacing, it's usually, again, 1 inch. And that's part of why you need the boning to help keep it from gapping. If you don't want it to gap and don't want to use boning, put your holes closer together. And I'm actually trying to move away from grommet holes because they do, because of the strain that they're under, they do eventually tear out. And because you have to punch a hole in the fabric to put the grommets in, and that weakens the fabric. So I'm looking at using lacing rings, not jump rings, lacing rings. Make sure you find lacing rings if you're going to go that route, because jump rings have a split in them and they will stretch out under the pressure. Lacing rings do not have a split. They are a solid ring of metal. And so you just sew them on. And from what I understand, they work really well. I'm experimenting with them. The other option is to do eyelets, which I don't have any fabric here that I can display that on. Basically, with an eyelet, you take an awl, you poke it through the fabric, you wiggle it around until you get the hole big enough. By going this route, you're not cutting the fabric, you're just spreading the threads apart. And then you do a buttonhole stitch around it. Any other questions? Yay. Yeah, sometimes I'll still draft by hand, but for the most part I use Seamly because it's just so much faster.
Okay. Any other questions for Seana? If you would rather speak than type, you can unmute and ask. Tomorrow we have your corset class, correct?
Yes.
You want to give a little blurb on that?
So I'll be talking about the basics of corset construction with, I'll find that book because it might be at my office. So that it's definitely not something for beginning sewers. There is a lot to it. But I'll be going over the basics of corset construction. That's good to know. And then I'll be showing you how to pattern the effigy bodies from Queen Elizabeth I, since most Ren fairs do Elizabethan.
Maryland is Henry VIII, and we love our Henry.
Yeah, stays are a little early for them. For them, you'd be using a stiffened kirtle. Because the first stays came into popularity in the late 1500s, I want to say, like 1590 or something like that.
Oh, St. Louis is Henry VIII and French. Oh, interesting.
Ooh. Stupid trains. So yeah, the book I recommend, Costume Technician's Handbook, 3rd edition. It's got the basics of patterning in it. I've made a few changes to what they've got because we found some things were consistently needing to be changed. So we're just like, why bother changing it afterwards when we can put it into the drafting?
All right. Any other questions for Seana? All right. Well, thank you again for another very informative class. I learned some things and I'm going to be practicing them this week. And I hope folks can join us for our next few classes. I think we've only got 2 more on the schedule right now, but we'll be adding things to the schedule as we go. So thank you again, Seana, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you for having me. Have a great night.
All right.